The Flight Attendant is a murder mystery show with a devilish sense of humor. Mixing thrilling narrative beats with witty dark comedy like an overpriced cocktail, this HBO Max series has all the ingredients necessary to be a certified hit. The show features a terrific performance by lead actress Kaley Cuoco, a deep roster of supporting characters, high stakes, a razor-sharp comedic edge, and a killer premise. And add all these items together, and The Flight Attendant is a great show that you should watch if you value having a good time, which is preferable to having a bad time, obviously. The show's greatness starts with its story. The Flight Attendant follows Cassie Bowden, an alcoholic flight attendant who plays fast and loose both in life and between the sheets, living the party girl lifestyle most people abandon after college, or when the Chicago Cubs won the World Series. Such is the life for Cassie and her friends who enjoy being along for the ride. Cassie's adolescent routine, however, is upended after a flight to Bangkok. During the flight, Cassie flirts with a first-class passenger named Alexander Sokolov to the point that she breaks company policy. After the flight, Cassie joins Alex for an evening of drinks and awkward drunken coitus, which was life-altering but not in the way Cassie expected. When waking up with a heavy hangover the next morning, Cassie realizes to her horror that Alex was murdered overnight and that she had rolled around in his blood, just like Patrick Bateman. Making matters worse, Cassie was so inebriated that she doesn't remember much of what occurred the previous night, which is information she needs in order to prove her innocence. After all, she is the FBI's primary suspect for Alex's murder, and in order for Cassie to clear her name, she must investigate and find evidence of who committed the crime and why, so that she does not end up in the slammer herself, which is a place that we'll all end up eventually. As you can discern, the Flight Attendant's premise is fantastic, and it really complements the show's dramatic stakes as well as its really funny comedy. The Flight Attendant has a lot of positive qualities in its favor, starting with its comedy. As described earlier, Cassie is a walking and talking train wreck of a person. She is constantly drunk and can't keep tabs on how many shots of tequila she has consumed, let alone the interwoven web of murder plots and conspiracies. She is completely ill-equipped to handle this crisis, and due to this, the Flight Attendant, while suspenseful, is frequently funny. Cassie regularly makes bad and reckless decisions that further incriminate her, which caused me to simultaneously laugh my ass off while also hiding my face behind my hands in embarrassment. She is a compellingly hilarious character in that regard. However, Cassie remains sympathetic despite the inherent humor within her troubled story. Played by Kaley Cuoco, the character is immensely likable. Sure, Cassie may be a complete mess of a person, but from my own perspective, I really wanted her to succeed. Against all the odds, killers, and alcoholic beverages stacked against her, I really hoped that she'd power through her self-destructive tendencies and emerge from the other side victorious. Even though she is a perennial fuck-up, which I can relate to, Cassie has an abundance of moxie, and it is incredibly disheartening to see her hit rock bottom, which she all does in spectacular fashion in ways that are simultaneously entertaining, thrilling, humorous, and just embarrassing. The supporting characters put Cassie's deteriorating mental state in perspective. Over the course of the show, Cassie's relationships with her friends and family devolve, crumbling under the weight of her bad decisions like Armie Hammer's career. In fact, Cassie's behavior is so corrosive that she actively pushes away her best friend Annie and makes her brother David fear for his family's safety, which is incredibly sad to see. And yes, while Cassie's antics can be amusing, they also leave a devastating impact on her psyche, which is heartbreaking. Cassie has a really good heart and is a good person despite all of her problems, and I just wanted to reach inside the television, grab her by the shoulders, and just start shaking her so that she can make some sense of her life. Kind of like how I wish someone would have done that to me in my 20s. She's a very likable and relatable person that deserves better than to dwell on her inner demons. The Flight Attendant really gets into Cassie's head. With her self-destructive tendencies, we see a very nuanced portrayal of alcoholism and addiction, one that is incredibly relatable to those of us who struggle with our own internal demons. Cassie's pain and how her resulting behavior pushes people away is understandable to people addicted to drugs, drugs and those of us with mental illnesses, and due to this, her character is very relatable. But with that being said, the Flight Attendant has one significant drawback in terms of its representation of trauma. Throughout the narrative, Cassie processes the traumatic events of waking up next to a dead man in a way that is digestible for the average viewer. She consistently retreats to the back of her own mind, imagining that she's back at the murder scene and talks to a mental personification of the dead Alex Sokolov, who is pretty spry for a dead guy, to be honest. As the show progresses, Cassie's discussions with Alex unlock new plot-critical details and revelations for Cassie while displaying how her lead character is processing her trauma. The problem here with the Flight Attendants and Cassie's representation of trauma is that it is the equivalent of a mini pizza bagel bite. Let's be clear, dealing with painful events is hard. Speaking as someone with my own traumatic origin story, handling grief and hardship is a very complicated process that takes a lot of time and effort to overcome. But in The Flight Attendant, this experience is, to some extent, trivialized. In the show, grappling with an emotionally devastating event has become bite-sized, essentially simplified for dramatic effect in order to make Cassie's trauma easily digestible for audiences, hence the mini pizza bagel bite comparison. And this portrayal of trauma really contrasts poorly with the representation of alcoholism, which was much more in-depth and on point. Where Cassie's addiction to booze and her resulting childish behavior is shown in the real world and has tangible consequences, the mental health aspect of her persona is internalized in a way that is far less detailed. While mental health episodes are inherently personal inward conflicts, they are generally far more complicated than retreating to a BBC Sherlock Holmes style of mind palace where you interrogate a dead person. It's just not that simple. Admittedly, this is a forgivable fault, though. Of course, the Flight Attendant's dramatization of trauma remains effective as far as television is concerned. Even though it is overly simplified for my taste, Cassie's internal conversations with Alex are entertaining, and that is honestly what is most important here. After all, viewers are watching The Flight Attendant because it is good television rather than a realistic story about trauma. If anything, The Flight Attendant is a fun show that blends high thrill suspense and a wondrous dark sense of humor, all while featuring a very compelling main character. Add on some great supporting characters like Rosie Perez's Megan or the obsessive hit woman Miranda, as well as a great sense of pace, The Flight Attendant is a really great show that is worth your time. Any other issue is just dead air. And with that, I want to thank my patrons, especially my high tier ones in Slasher Avails, Mom, David Devlin, and Miles Nelson. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world to me, and I love y'all. Thank you.